In today's video, I have 8 clever tricks for you for using gum arabic with your watercolours. Welcome back to my channel. Now, if you're a regular here, you'll notice I've got a completely different background. My hallway's full of boxes and it sounds a bit echoey. This is because I have literally just moved house. So I will get some art on the walls. I will put the things in the hallway into the kitchen where they're supposed to be going, and we'll get everything neat and tidy very soon. If you want to know what's going on with my life and why I've had to move studios, you'll have to go over to my Patreon page. In the meantime, we're going to get on with today's video. Now, if you are new here, please do consider subscribing. I make free videos on watercolour painting, colour mixing, a little bit of mixed media. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make one video here a week on YouTube with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. So today we're looking at gum arabic, and I've got some in this little bottle here. So it's kind of a thick, sticky, pale yellow liquid. Now, you've probably heard of it because it's one of the binders in watercolour paints. So if you've ever opened a tube of watercolours and all of this sticky stuff has come out instead of the paint, then it's probable that a large proportion of it was gum arabic. It's not the only binder or the only ingredient used to make watercolour paints. There are often others used as well. Now, it's a natural substance. It comes from the acacia tree and it's actually edible. So it's used in a lot of manufacturing of foodstuffs, and it's also used for things like gummed tape. And also, if you had, old-fashioned postal stamps before they became self-adhesive, at least in the UK they're self-adhesive now. Before that happened, you used to have to lick them or use a sponge to wet them, and that would have been gum arabic too. Now, you'll notice that you can buy it separately in a bottle like this, and you probably have wondered what you might do with such an item. So today I've got 8 ways that you can use gum arabic to improve and help your watercolour painting. So I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and I'll be pointing the camera downwards and demonstrating exactly how you use this really, really useful product. I've also got a discount code for you that you can grab later on as well. So as we go into these 8 tips, let's talk briefly about the 3 properties that gum arabic has and how it changes your watercolours when you mix it in with them or apply it to them. So the first property that it has is, as we've spoken about, it makes them more adhesive. The second property it has is that it dries shiny. And the third property it has is that it slows down the drying time of your paints. So with that in mind, let's talk about the shiny factor. Let's talk about how we can use that to make areas of our watercolour painting shiny, should we want to do so. Now, I've made a little page of samples here, and we're going to work on top of them, and in some cases make new samples too as I show you these techniques. So what I have here is the Jackman's Art Materials Gum Arabic. And what I like about this particular one is that the bottle is quite small, and you've got this little dropper top here, so it's quite easy to just get a small amount of the gum arabic out, and we're going to dispense it into a little pot. Now, I have other brands. This is one that I have as well. This is the Dairylide one. Now, the problem I had with this one, although the quality is fine, what used to happen when I first got my first bottle of this is I would put my paintbrush into the bottle and get the gum arabic that way. And although I was careful always to put a clean paintbrush in, what happened is, of course, it sort of loosened and released some of the old paint that was in the brush, and I ended up getting in a mess, so I don't do that anymore. So if you've already got some gum arabic, make sure you dispense it into a little dish or a pot before you use it. It's much easier. And just like masking fluid, if you've got a bottle of that stuff and the lid is off, obviously this little one here will not spill much because it's got a tiny dropper on, but some of them, caps like this, once they're open, the whole thing is literally open to the air, and if you knock it over, it's going to go everywhere. So do be careful with them to dispense what you need and then put them away. So I'm going to just squeeze some of this out. Now, I should clarify, I said at the beginning that gum arabic was edible. That doesn't mean that these art brands are food grade. So, you know what your parents told you, don't do glue. Now, I've made a little butterfly wing here, and I've painted it and allowed it to dry. So I've got some permanent rose here and some phthalo blue green shade. I'll tell you a bit more about the paints I'm using later on. And I'm just going to apply the gum arabic over the top, as simple as that. I've done some scoring on here to get these little lines as well, which I've demonstrated in other videos. I should probably do a video tutorial about butterflies, shouldn't I? That would be a nice one. And all I'm going to do is paint the gum arabic on top, but I don't want to paint it on sort of full strength, so I'm going to put a little bit of water with it. Now, I tend not to mix too much water in. I tend just to get sort of a wet brush and pick some up like that. I have heard sort of horror stories of the gum arabic, cracking if you apply it too thickly. They tend to be kind of urban myths, these things, don't they? I don't know anybody it's actually happened to. So what I'm going to do there is put that over the top. Now, you absolutely could mix the gum arabic in first of all. We're going to do that a little bit later on. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water to my brush, pick up a bit more of the gum arabic, keep painting. So yes, you could add the gum arabic to the paint first of all, and it would still dry shiny, but what it wouldn't do is, it wouldn't stay put quite as well as this, and you wouldn't get exactly the same watercolor techniques because it does change the properties of the paint. So if you're just looking to make an area shiny, and I guarantee on camera you'll be barely to be able to see this even when it's dry, but it really is very effective, and it's very subtle as well. So in other words, if you tip, you might not see it, and then you tip your head on one side and you think, oh, well, that bit really shines. And it's just such a nice thing to have in a painting. If you have actually got something that you want to highlight or is actually shiny, it might be a shiny nut, for instance, that you've painted. Any shiny object whatsoever, or man-made object, can be made more shiny, fantastic for water, just by the addition of gum arabic on top of the area that's already been painted. So for our second gum arabic trick, have you ever used glazing medium with acrylic paints to make them transparent and shiny and to layer one colour on top of another? Now, glazing can be done in watercolour without any additional mediums. You can just layer one colour over another colour. However, if you use gum arabic, it can make it even more effective. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So let's look at this idea of glazing. Now, if you're wondering what glazing is, it has slightly different meanings in different mediums, but with watercolour, what it generally means is to overlay a transparent colour so that the underneath colour shines through. And what it's most often used for is adjusting things, and it can be used with transparent colours. It can also be used, with colour opposites. So for example, if you had painted someone's face and they looked too yellow, you could use the colour opposite, which would be violet, watered down over the top, and it would neutralise. Because watercolours are transparent, you can use that to neutralise. Now, you absolutely can do glazing without gum arabic. So if you've ever used acrylic glazing medium in order to make your paint more transparent and shiny, you can do exactly the same with it here. So the colour I'm using here is Dairylide Yellow. Now, all the colours that I'm using today are from a set of paints that I have been working with Jackman's art materials to design, and this is going to be our essentials set. So we made the floral set, and the reviews for those have been fantastic. I'm so pleased with them, but I wanted to make an absolute beginner's set as well. So these are the basic colours that you need to get started, and what you've got in this set are primaries, warm and cool, and some neutrals. So if you're interested, the set at the time of filming this video, we're going to be taking pre-orders in a couple of days. So if you are interested in this set, the best thing to do is to pop over to my Facebook group. It's exactly the same name as this YouTube channel, so it's In the Studio with Michele Webber. And the first 20 sets that we sell, we're going to have some offers. So there's going to be some extras included in that paint set, so well worth getting in at the beginning. So I'm just putting some of this colour into this little pot here, and then I'm just going to take some of the gum arabic and mix it in like so, and a little bit of water too. And this will just add to the transparency and shininess of the colour. So I'm going to overlay it on top of the blue square here. This is Phthalo Blue green shade, and what I'm going to do is take it across and out of the sides so you can see both how it looks on the blue but also how it looks on the white paper. So let's go across with it, and do you see what happens? Now what happens is that you end up with green, because of course yellow and blue make green. Now do you see that it is picking up a little bit of the underneath colour, and this always will happen with watercolours. So you have to be careful how you apply, and only apply into areas that you want to see it. There we are, you can see it just adds a little bit of shininess and depth to it. Now, as I said, you can do this without the glazing medium. So let's go in straight with just the paint and see the difference. So I'll go from the other side this time. And there we are, you can see how it looks. Now you may not see a lot of difference on the camera because, as I said, you can't really see shine on camera too easily, and of course it's got to dry yet as well. But this one here just has a little bit more depth to it. So a great method there for adjusting your colours by going over the top with another colour. And if you want that real glazed, shiny look that you get with acrylic glazing medium, but in a watercolour version, gum arabic is the answer. So I'm just showing you these glazed areas once they're dry, and look how much more transparent and more effective the one that's got the gum arabic looks, as opposed to the glazing that's done just with watercolour. So for trick number 3, as you are painting, lifting out highlights can be a really, really nice way of getting subtle light areas in your painting. It's much more subtle than using something really hard edged, for instance, masking fluid. Now I'm going to show you how applying gum arabic to your paper before the lifting out process, providing you know in advance that you're going to be doing it, can really, really help to lift that paint off of the paper. So if you can see here, I've drawn 2 circles. Now the difference is that this circle has just been drawn on watercolour paper. This circle here, I have gone in and I've made dots with gum arabic, but then I've allowed it to dry. So this is a technique that you would use when you know in advance that you're going to lift out soft highlights. So I use this technique for lifting out sort of soft spots on things, soft stripes, things like that. It's useful for things like painting seashells and rocks and perhaps animal fur. What I'm going to do now is a 2-stage process. Well, actually, including this stage, it's 3 stages. So I've made some dots here. I'm going to just tip the board back and forward. I'm hoping that the camera will pick up the dots, but if you can't see them, they'll become clear once I go in with the paint. So I've got here some French Ultramarine. Now somebody asked me in one of my videos where I got this little palette from, and the truth is a lot of these little ceramic palettes that I use on YouTube are actually food-based things. So we used to have a sort of discount store near us, and it sold all this crockery, and you know, it had a lot of things for dips and things like that. They do make fantastic palettes, and particularly now I'm making so many YouTube videos, I really enjoy using the ceramic palettes. I think they look a little bit prettier than the plastic ones. Of course, the plastic ones, if you're travelling around to art classes and painting outdoors, can be a lot more practical. So I'm going to mix some paint up, and then what I'm going to do is paint each of these circles right across with the ultramarine, and then I'm just going to let them dry, and then later on, when they're dry, we're going to lift out the paint colour. So it's something I do a lot, is let things dry out before doing the next technique or working in the next layer. And I think it's something I talked about in my last video that beginners often not only don't do but don't understand, can be quite important. And it's not your fault that you don't understand it. The reason you don't understand it is because you don't see it, because if you're watching something like a YouTube video, of course the video is going to be clipped and edited, so what looks like, you know, a half a second gap could be half an hour. And when paint dries on the paper, obviously it already has some gum arabic and other binders in it, so it helps to set it to the paper. So it can just be a little bit more effective. Depends on the technique, of course, but sometimes it can be effective to actually let your paint dry before you do the next thing. So you can see here how we've applied to this circle that has just been drawn on the paper with nothing else going on. We're going to now go into the one that has had the gum arabic spots applied, and that was allowed to dry too. Now the gum arabic will take longer to dry than water, so if you're going to do this technique, you know, there's a lot of patience required here, and generally speaking with watercolour painting. So hopefully you can see the spots on camera, but if you can't, you should be able to see them slightly appearing. Now I'm going to be really careful because gum arabic, of course, is water soluble, so if I keep scrubbing at it with my paintbrush, then I'm going to remove it all anyway, and all the paint's going to get underneath the spots. But you can see them there just appearing. I have actually, when I was researching for this video, I have actually seen people using it as almost a soft resist when painting fabric and things like that. You can see those little bits coming through there. But I actually found when experimenting that it just wasn't stable enough for doing that. It just kind of, it moved too much and it lifted too much. But it was an interesting thing. I think there are other better methods of reserving exact pale areas. But that's not what we're using it for in this case. What we're using it for is to block this layer of paint from hitting the paper, so that when we do lift out these soft spots later on, they're going to come off of the paper more effectively. And I'll do it on the one here, and I'll do it on this one here. So in about 1 second, you're going to see me going back to this with the paint dry, but bear in mind that it could be, 20-30 minutes in real life. It's just that I'm cutting the video, so as if by magic it will be dry in a second. So my two circles have dried. I'm going to show you how this works on both of them. I'm going to use this cotton bud dipped in water and squeezed out. Now, if you wanted hard-edged dots on these circles, you could just use masking fluid and that would do the job. But we're going for a much softer effect here. So I'm just going to get this wet. It's wet, but it's not drippy wet. And what I'm going to do now is just agitate the surface here and get some nice soft-edged highlights lifted out. So you can see getting these nice light areas. You can see how this is good for, anything patterned, soft patterns, perhaps pottery, perhaps seashells, perhaps an animal of some kind. And there we are, we've got those highlights. However, let's try now on this one here, where I've pre-made the highlights with gum arabic. And what should have happened is it should have stopped the paint from getting through to the paper. So we should get a brighter highlight, but still with soft edges. So again, I'm going to get the cotton bud and make tiny circles here. Do remember to buy the ones that don't have the plastic stems, because they're very, very bad for the environment. So these ones have got paper stems, so that they just degrade. And I'm going to rub these circles here. Now, straight away, look at the difference there, because the gum arabic dried and formed a barrier to stop that paint from sitting into the paper. You might need to as well keep changing this so that you're always working with a clean part. At this point in the video, can I ask you for a favour? If you're getting some value from this video, could you please click the like button? It's free and it will really help my channel to grow. YouTube rewards channels with audience interaction. So if you click like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, YouTube will enable my channel to grow. I'm almost at 20,000 subscribers at the point of making this video. I'm so grateful to all of you, and you can help my channel to grow just by clicking the like button. There you are. So look how much easier things lift out if you've got the gum arabic underneath. Now, despite this, I would not ever suggest that you put gum arabic under your entire painting, because it would affect how the watercolour applied on top. But if there are any areas that you know that you're going to lift soft highlights out of, and you just want it to be a little bit more effective, place the gum arabic in those places, allow it to dry, put your paint on top, allow that to dry, and then you can lift out. So trick number 4 is a really simple tip, and it's for those of you that are in very hot environments. And if you've ever tried painting when it's really, really hot, and you're trying to put the second lot of paint on and the first layer is dry already, and you just can't do those wet into wet techniques because everything's drying as soon as it hits the paper. Even happens in England a couple of days of the year before it gets cold again, and we all wear jumpers and start moaning about the rain, which is a national hobby of ours actually. And if you have trouble with this hot environment and the paint is drying too quickly before you even have a chance to work your techniques, I'm going to show you how to use the gum arabic in with your paint just to slow down those drying times and allow you to have an area that's workable for longer. So let's go wet into wet now and assume that we're in an atmosphere where it's very hot and the paint is drying very quickly. You could actually just mix it in with the paints, but I'd like to, I think, put it on the paper. I'm going to add quite a lot of water to this one because I don't want it to be too sticky, because it does affect how well the wet into wet technique works. So we're just going to use it like this so that that layer of water will just dry a little bit more slowly than it would otherwise do. Now, an area that's got gum arabic mixed in with it can take 10 minutes to dry rather than just 30 seconds or so. So we're going to go in now, and I've got two colours. I've got the Dairylide Yellow again, so we'll put that in like so, and then I think we'll have some Pyrrole Red here, so let's pop that in too. So you can see we can get this wet into wet effect. You will find as well that the bleeding outwards may not be quite as much as you would get when you're using just plain water, but really it depends how wet the paint is that you're applying, and you can still see that you get a lovely wet into wet technique, but that this area is just going to take much longer to dry, so you're not fighting with the heat that's in the room and finding that everything dries out immediately. So trick number 5, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is my absolute favourite way of using gum arabic, and the way that I personally use it in my own work the most often, and that's to use it for water reflections. Now, if you have complex water reflections, for instance, if you've got a river and above the river there are trees and fences and houses and all sorts of things reflected in the river, you need to work wet into wet, because you're not going to really want hard edges and hard drying lines within the water. But you haven't got long enough to put all those shadows in, all those complex things, and basically reflect everything that you painted very slowly up the top in the water. Gum arabic is your friend. So you're going to apply the gum arabic to a underpainting of water, and then you're going to work your shadows on top. Now, the fact that the paint that goes on top has a kind of a smeary, shiny appearance is absolutely going to be your friend. It's going to help you to make the water reflections look like they're actual water. I've even used it on occasion when I have, for instance, lily pads floating on top of some water, and I don't put the gum arabic on the lily pads, and then I just put it in the water, and so you get the lily pads that are a matte finish, and then you get the water around them that's a shiny finish. You wouldn't believe how effective this is. It doesn't always show well on camera, so when I'm telling you something shiny, you're just going to have to take my word for it if it doesn't show completely well on the camera. So I'm going to show you now how I use gum arabic to get realistic, beautiful looking water reflections. So let's look at water reflections, and I've painted almost a mini tiny landscape here. So we can imagine that this is a riverbank, and then in the foreground here you have got your water. So we need to put these reflections in, but they're very complicated, and if we were to do this in a normal manner, then we just wouldn't have time. It'd all start to dry and we get a load of drying lines on our paper. So we're going to use gum arabic, which is going to slow down the drying time significantly. Instead of, a minute and a half, we're going to have 10 or 15 minutes in order to work into this area. Now, I will apply the gum arabic over this whole area, but if you're working on a very large painting, you don't need to do the whole thing in one go. You can just apply the gum arabic to an area, work your shadows in, and then sort of just join up and apply the gum arabic a bit further across. It's going to stop you getting those drying lines as well. One tip I've got for you when painting water is that you want to make sure you're using the same colours in the water as in the sky, or at least some of them. So if the water in the photograph looks completely different to the sky colour, you want to at least use some of that sky colour in your water. It's very hard in a painting at least to make it look like it's water if it's not reflecting at least some of the colour in the sky. And when you're doing these things here, quite often I see people make their shadows, and because they haven't bothered to note down what the colours are they've used on the riverbank above, it doesn't look very realistic. So I've actually written down the colours that I've used here. I've used quite a lot of things. So I've got the Dairylide Yellow. I've also used Hansa Yellow, which is very similar to lemon. So that's our cool yellow in the set. I've used some of this phthalo blue green shade, which makes a fantastic sky colour when watered down. It's a lot like cerulean, but much punchier. And I've also used some Payne's grey, some burnt sienna, and some raw umber, which is a very light brown. So what I'm going to do is apply water and gum arabic to this area here, and then just work in with the colours that I've used above, confident in the knowledge that I've got a lot more time than I would otherwise have. So you can see that I've already applied the sky colour and allowed it to dry, and by allowing that layer to dry, it's going to let things set in. So as I was saying earlier, and as I said in my last video, I think there's a motorbike outside. Oh no, it's an aeroplane. It's an aeroplane. There you are. Joys of home filming. Yeah, as I was saying in my last video, it's really helpful sometimes to let a layer dry. You don't want to be working on everything wet all of the time. Of course, there are times when you need an area to be wet when you work in order to get a soft edge. But don't be afraid of layering up and re-wetting, because it does allow things to set into place. So here we are. I've got my area of gum arabic and water. I've put quite a lot of gum arabic in there. Now I'm just going to almost copy what I've got above. So let's go in with a bit of the yellow, and just, you know, you can use it just as if you were painting the ordinary watercolours. You can add more water, and you actually don't get as much backruns and bleeding as you would do otherwise. If that's something that troubles you all the time, it should be something that you'll be able to control a little bit more easily. So rather than pre-mixing these colours and greens, I'm just going straight in with them on the paper, which is a way that I would normally work anyway. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact replica of what's in the picture above, but it should be similar. It should be similar. And the same with clouds. You know, if you've got light areas like we've got in the centre here, you want to make sure that that's what's going on in the water as well. So I'm going to go in with some of these lighter yellows here. Now, I've got some running upwards here, or as I'm painting it's downwards, because I've actually got the board tipped away from me. It's the easiest way to set up the camera, but I would, if I were you, work on this flat so you wouldn't have these problems that I'm having with things sort of running. I'm going to take a little bit of the water out there, getting these bluer areas, and then we're going to use a little bit of Payne's Grey down the bottom here. Now, Payne's Grey is a strong colour, and it's also a slightly blue based grey, so it's a really useful colour. It's why I've included it in my set, because it's really useful for mixing, and it can be used as well as a replacement for black. So if you need darks and black is a little bit too harsh, you can use Payne's Grey. So again, we're going to go in here, we'll get a little bit more blue in here, and we're starting to get a mirror image of what's above. As I said, it's not exact, it doesn't need to be exact. Now I need to put the tree in, and also the fence. Now, whether you're using gum arabic or not, you want to go in at this point with sticky paint, because that will ensure that it doesn't move very far. So I'm just going to take these across here with quite sticky paint, and then just come up like this. And can you see how it gets kind of blurry and smeary, and this really helps it to look like water once it's dry. I'm now going to add the tree, and the colour I've got for this is raw umber. So I've just got some little sample sets here from where I've been mixing, and we've been trialling the colours, but they will be available in pans and tube colours. And again, I'm going to go in almost straight from the paint here. We're going to go up like this. Now, do remember that whichever way something's facing, and it's mostly straight up and down here, we've got sort of quite still water here, but whichever way something's facing, it will be facing the opposite way. So if you've got a post that's running that way, then the post in the water will run that way. It won't continue at the same angle, it'll be the opposite. And you know, you don't even have to count the branches on these. You'll be amazed what you can get away with, because people just don't study, you know, one area of the painting like this. And one thing that could be quite effective with water is to go quite dark here at the shoreline. So there we are, absolutely perfect for water. The gum arabic has allowed me to work for much longer on this piece of work. It's allowed me to avoid drying lines. It's dried in this strange kind of semi-bleeding, smeary manner, and it's also going to dry shiny. On a larger painting, it looks so effective as water. So for trick number 6, we're going to use the gum arabic in the way that it's designed, and that's to be a natural glue. So do you ever apply things like loose powders or metallic powders or brusho or things of that nature to your watercolour paper, and do you find they don't always stick as well as you want them to? So we're going to use gum arabic for this. Now, be aware that certain brusho techniques, if you don't know what brusho is, it's a watercolour pigment powder. Certain brusho techniques where you want those sort of explosions of colour won't work if you put the gum arabic on first. But if you're using the gum arabic, for example, to make sort of pollen dust on a flower, and you're finding that it moves afterwards, it ends up smudging into other areas, then putting gum arabic on first is going to be helpful to you. I'm going to show you how we do it now. So I've made this petal here, and I've painted it in the Pyrrole Red, and I want to add a little bit of sparkle. Now, ideally I'd be using some of the metallic pigment powders you can buy, but I've just moved house, so we have eyeshadow. Now, this is actually, you'll be amazed to find out, if you're a fine artist, you'll be amazed to find out that this is something that's done very often actually by coloured pencil artists who are more craft-based. They will use eyeshadows to give a little bit of shimmer to their picture. I think it's a fantastic idea. No reason at all why you can't do it with watercolours. But we're going to ensure that the pigment powder sticks a little bit better. Now, this is a colour that I bought terrible for buying makeup, me, and then discovering that actually, sadly, it does not make me look like a supermodel. So I'm going to put a little bit of the gum arabic and water in here. So again, it's mostly pure gum arabic, but I've just picked up, you know, there's enough water on my brush, shall we say. What this also means, if you're sprinkling pigment powders on, is it helps things to stay in one place. So you'll find that the powder mostly sticks to the area where the gum arabic is, and mostly doesn't stick to the rest. You can sort of tap it off. That depends on how fine the pigment powders are. I mean, if you're using something like a glitter, you'll find it'll easily tap off the paper where it hasn't been stuck to the glue. But if you're using something much, much finer, like this eyeshadow, you may well find that it attaches itself in all sorts of places. But you wouldn't normally have, you know, one little petal like this. You'd likely have a few, and so it wouldn't actually matter if a bit of this metallic powder went elsewhere. There we are. Looks much better on this piece of paper than it does on my eyes, that's for sure. So I'm just going to tap that there, and whenever you're using any kind of powder, you never want to put a wet brush in it. It's always a good idea if you get a little stiff sort of old acrylic brush, and you can just use it to pick up and then tap there. And I think once that dries, it'll be shiny as well as sparkly. I think that's really, really effective. So trick number 7 is another simple one, and we're going to be using it as a glue again. So have you ever squeezed out tube paint into your plastic or ceramic palettes and found that after it dries, the little blocks keep coming away? So this is really annoying, isn't it? I did it with a set of paints. I lifted up the palette and all the little blocks of paint fell out. The paint was still perfectly usable because watercolour re-wets, as we know. However, the little blocks didn't stay put. So we can use the gum arabic to glue those little blocks back in place. You'll need to place it on and then allow it a couple of days to dry. Now, the reason that the paint doesn't stay in the palettes tends to be because there's a lot of fillers in it. So it's sometimes, but not always, an indication of cheaper paints. It can also happen with colours that have a lot of opacity, a lot of chalkiness to them. Colours like Potter's colours and Naples Yellow. It can also happen very, very often with gouache paints because, again, they have got more fillers, more binders and more opaque pigments in. So if you have this problem, you can use your gum arabic to glue those little blocks of paint back into the palettes so that they're not causing you a problem, and then you can just carry on using them as you would normally do. So for trick number 8, we're going to use the gum arabic to restore our paintbrushes to an extent to the condition they were in when we bought them. So if the point has gone off of your brush, if your brushes have got a little bit scruffy, or perhaps you've left them in a water jar, don't put your brushes in water jars. I tell my students off for it all the time. Always lay your brush flat on a piece of paper or a piece of newspaper while you're painting. Never stand your watercolour brushes in a pot of water. However, hindsight is a wonderful thing. If you've already done that and you've ruined your paintbrushes, we can get them back to a certain extent to how they were when we first bought them. Now, if you remember when you first bought your watercolour brush and had the little tube on, you took it off, had a beautiful point, or it was lovely and flat, and it was rock hard, and then you put it in water and you sort of bashed it around a little bit and it softened up, and then you could use it. Well, that was gum arabic. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that process and reshape your brush and give it a chance to dry in a better shape than it is in now, particularly if it's bent or particularly if the bristles have sprayed out a little bit. Now, what you want to do is give your brush a really, really thorough clean. You can get special brush cleaners, but for watercolour, I tend to just use a little bit of hand soap and some warm water. And you're going to give your brush a clean. Now, don't be afraid of bashing your brush on the bottom of the water jar that you're cleaning it in, of the sink that you're cleaning it in. It won't do it any harm as long as you're not leaving it there, for a long time. You want to really get that brush as clean as you possibly can, and then rinse it in clean water and blot it dry. What you're going to do then is work some gum arabic into it, and then you're going to reshape the brush with your fingers. Now, if the brush was originally in a pointed shape, do shape it into a point. If it was in a flat shape, then do reshape that too. What you might also want to do, if you have got a pointed brush that has really, really badly fish hooked, you can just get either a scalpel blade or a little pair of scissors and just trim that brush. It's never ever going to get back to the point that it had when you first got it. However, if it's got a terribly bad fish hook end, then actually it will be somewhat improved if you get rid of that. You will need very, very sharp scissors or a sharp knife don't just try and cut it with paper scissors. You want preferably something like embroidery scissors, or if you're into crafts and you have scissors you keep only for fabric, use those. Or you can use, like I said, a very sharp scalpel knife. Just lay it on a board and you can trim it there. And then go through this process of cleaning and shaping your brush. Once you've got that gum arabic on it, it shouldn't be left drippy wet, you know, make sure that it's dry enough that it's actually going to hold its shape. And then you just want to lay it on a flat surface in a warm place, and once it's dry you can stand it upright. I would leave it for a few days actually, because it just helps to set those bristles back into a better shape. It may not get back to 100% of the shape it was in when you bought it from the shop, but it can really reshape your brush and extend the life of it almost indefinitely. So I do enjoy reading all the comments you leave me on this channel, and I answer as many of them as I am able to. Do let me know if you are going to use any of these tricks that I've shown you today in your own painting, or if they were new to you, if you've actually got some gum arabic, or if you're thinking about getting some now. Now in this video we worked wet into wet, and we allowed one colour to bleed into another. If you're quite new to watercolour painting, you might not quite have got the hang of that yet, but it's okay, because I've got a video for you that will explain to you exactly how to do this technique. You can watch that video right now.